This is an industry that's a noble industry. These leaders are every bit as talented as any other industry in the world, and they have to deal with every other challenge that any business has, plus the weather. And they're worried, and I know when they're worried, then we should be worried.
And there's certainly a lot of headwinds that are hitting rural America now, namely that the populations living in rural counties has gotten pretty old. And in many of these places, they're depopulating.
This is probably a 50-year-old issue. This is the result of farming and rural individuals having fewer and fewer kids. And then even those kids that they have don't want to come back and work on the farm. How do I attract them when the fabric of these rural economies has been unwinding for the last 40 or 50 years for a variety of different reasons? Some are probably self-inflicted and some are not. This is the vicious cycle that we face in the food and ag space for talent and really in rural economies today.
So without sounding too hyperbolic here, could we say that immigration policy is effectively food security policy at the same time?
Look, I asked one of the CEOs what he thought the talent pipeline was, and he said,
rural America is facing a reckoning. Tariff policy, trade policy, immigration policy, shifts in our weather, and of course technology are all coming together to create a brand new environment for agribusiness in this country. And I wanted to take some time today to pick apart what this means for the future of labor and the future of food in this country, because the policies that impact rural America impact everyone. David, welcome to Population Next. As you know, there is a real kind of uneasiness in the American labor market right now, with months of rather shaky jobs numbers. But our conversation today is really going to dive into what's happening in rural America in particular and the agricultural sector, because that's your area of expertise. Give me a 30,000-foot view of what's happening now in the rural jobs market and why we should be aware of this or even concerned.
Thanks, Bradley. I appreciate being here. So there's an old country saying, goes something like this: some days it's chickens and some days it's feathers. And right now, I think from a labor perspective, we're seeing a lot more feathers in the market than we are chickens. That's both from sort of lower level labor positions, as well as even moving up to the executive level. The rural labor market is primarily driven by the export of proteins or agricultural commodities. That's what drives the entire rural economy and everything associated with it. So when you have talent issues or constraints, you have a ripple effect, maybe not unlike other parts of the economy, but one that's particularly profound for a pretty vulnerable and important part of our economy in the United States.
So if you were to look around the room right now and do a temperature check of leaders in the agribusiness space, are they feeling optimistic about the future or a little pessimistic right now?
It's interesting that it's a mixed bag, and it like many things, it varies and depends. And again, my expertise is more the talent side, less so than the economic policies, et cetera. But it's our job at Slate and Search Partners to understand how these things affect, talent. So I would say a couple of important reactions to that question. Depending on where you're at in the food and agricultural value chain, you're either super worried or you're kind of okay and hoping for the best. So the closer you sort of get to the farmer and selling to the farmer right now, things are tough. Okay, things are difficult, things are challenging, and probably won't change for a while. If you're a farmer that happens to have a commodity where there's an open market and prices are high, you might be a little happier. What's interesting, though, is regardless of where organizations are in the food and ag value chain, what I'm hearing is everybody is in cost-cutting mode, but for different reasons. And that, I think, from a macroeconomic perspective in our country should be something that we should be concerned with and at least understand.
Right. And there's certainly a lot of headwinds that are hitting rural America now that I don't think most Americans are really fully aware of, namely that the populations living in rural counties has gotten pretty old. And in
Yeah.
many of these places, they're depopulating. So for you as an expert in filling a lot of these roles, where are they finding the people to fill these jobs?
It does depend on the level of positions and the requirements for the job. Look, this is probably a 50-year-old issue. This population decline that you are an expert in and have seen is the result of farming and rural individuals having fewer and fewer kids, and then even those kids that they have don't want to come back and work on the farm, which is a bigger issue. Local populations for decades have not wanted to do the type of work, gradually so, that these rural economies offer. And that has been replaced primarily from people that are not born in the USA. Now, I'm not talking just illegal, some are, but about 42% of the population that works in these agricultural closest to the farm, either producing, harvesting, processing these agricultural commodities, were born someplace else. And so that has been the way that we've accommodated and been resilient. Or these communities have been resilient over the years in order to deal with the population gap that you referred to.
So, without sounding too hyperbolic here, could we say that immigration policy is effectively food security policy at the same time?
That isn't hyperbolic. I think everyone, the leaders that I talk to, I interview about 6 to 10 CEOs prior to the podcast to kind of get their pulse, and they're on different parts of the value chain. They uh, they vary in their level of concern, but each one of them really sees this as being key. This is an industry that's a noble industry. This is an industry that is these leaders are every bit as talented as any other industry in the world, um, and don't quite get the headlines that they probably deserve in terms of intellect and capabilities, et cetera. And they have to deal with every other challenge that any business has, plus the weather. So, I have worked in this space for my whole life, and it's an honor to work with these folks, and they're worried. And I know when they're worried, then we should be worried.
And can we talk a moment about the weather? I mean, it does seem like it's a volatile subject these days, whether we're talking about climate change, which seems to be like a 4-letter word in pretty large swaths of the country. But extreme weather is becoming a norm for farmers and for agri-producers. So you've got this long-term trend of demographic decline. You've got this shock around immigration policy. You have now this shock coming around different weather events, whether that be drought, land salination, storms. How are farmers factoring this into the equation that's already quite complex?
Yeah, I think this lends itself to consider what kinds of leaders that we need in the future, which is really the area that I get excited about. I talked to a CEO recently, and he said, "Look, the kind of people that can handle all of these problems that you're talking about are not technocrats. They're generalists. They're able to deal with ambiguity in a way that our generation hasn't. They're probably, in fact, he said, they're probably smarter than I am, have skill sets and tools that I've never seen or used, and are able to use them and incorporate them quickly into their leadership style. These are the types of folks that we see are going to need to be able to address these issues and deal with the global nature of, as you say, certainly the weather, but also the nature of these markets that we're dealing with.
So if these CEOs are looking for this new talent pipeline, is there effectively like a Future Farmers of America type organization to find these resilient minds that the industry so desperately needs in the coming years?
Well, folks like to hire us to try to find some of those folks, but and I will say that most of the CEOs I talked to said that homegrown is only going to go so far. In other words, succession planning and hiring from within, which is an important part of any organization's future, rural or not, that can only go so far with the rapid change of and all the things that you described before. Look, I asked one of the CEOs what he thought the talent pipeline was, and he said it's empty.
Oh,
In fact, his they have a saying at his company. He said if you have a role to fill, hire 5 people. The first 3 may not pass the drug test. One will show up for about a half a day and leave because the work is too hard, and hopefully the fifth one sticks around. And he says, that's not too far from reality. So depending on the organization, depending on the commodity, depending on the location, and depending on the level, this is the reality that we have. Maybe one other comment, and again, this is not just in food and ag. This is rural economies. One of the other CEOs mentioned that he does a lot of driving in his job, which is part of what we do in food and ag. And there's a community in Oklahoma that he drives through on his way to one of the plants. And he said, you can tell that this community was once thriving, happy, abundant, 2.5 miles of downtown, most of which is boarded up today. How do I attract people, talent, to deal with these challenging issues, which are exciting for the right folks and the right, how do I attract them to this? How do I attract them when the fabric of these rural economies has been unwinding for the last 40 or 50 years for a variety of different reasons? Some are probably self-inflicted and some are not. This is the vicious cycle that we face in the food and ag space for talent and really in rural economies today.
and I'm curious, what did the CEO think was the solution to like reinvigorating these small towns, these small cities where,
Reinvigoration of the small cities is more difficult, but I would say there's sort of 3 different approaches to folks that are being resilient, or companies that have been being resilient at these times. First is innovation. Shouldn't surprise you. You're talking about automation, uh, moving to more value added crops. That's not new. Value added crops where there's a general thought that the closer you can add value to where the crop is actually produced could be a good thing from a logistical perspective. And so, um, how do some organizations moving in that direction? They are unfortunately using labor that's illegal sometimes because that's the only source of labor that they have. So innovation occurs in many different ways. Although when we're cost cutting, I get worried that these organizations are not going to spend the time and money on innovation that they should. Number 2, some of them just abandon ship. Okay, and that is what that can mean though is using the land that was previously used for commodities or manufacturing of food and ag products and selling it off for other use. And the trouble with that is once land leaves the ag space, it rarely comes back. And I think the third thing I've seen is a bit of what I call a surrender or perhaps an adoption of the new economic reality and world economy, which is countries like Brazil and others are filling the gap that the US has maybe not created, but exists because of some of the challenges we have today. And so they are moving their headquarters or organizations to, say, Europe. And they're taking a more global approach and taking advantage of global talent to not only tap into the US, but Brazil as sources for their products and services and or other countries. So it's a variety of different approaches that I think are working today. Some of which are beneficial to the rural economies you're talking about, some are not.
right. Now, I have to bring up the T word, tariffs,
Yeah.
because we can't avoid a conversation without them today. And certainly not a political question, more about the instability that tariffs bring to the supply chain of food. I mean, I opened my refrigerator door early today just to see what products were actually made in this country, and it was about 50-50. And those are not shelf stable products. Those are things like fruits and vegetables that come here from Latin American countries. This obviously has thrown things off. How is it impacting hiring decisions for these leaders across agribusiness?
So depending on countries that you are exporting your products to, depending on the types of products that you're exporting, and depending on where you sit in the food value chain, um, it varies. And what I can say, the common theme that I'm hearing is cost cutting across the board. So if your commodities are doing particularly well, and cost cutting means less hiring. Okay, cost cutting means raises are not as high if you get them at all. Cost cutting means bonuses are down, layoffs. Tyson Foods recently uh, mothballed the plant in Lexington, Nebraska. 3,200 workers were let go. Um, this isn't because cattle prices aren't high; they are. It was because they were unable. The cattle the cattle herd this year is particularly small, and they were unable to keep their factories running at capacity, and so they had to shut down this massive plant. So, I mean, back to talent, it is it, it just depends on where they're at, and right now, I don't see a lot of hiring for key positions, with maybe some notable exceptions on anything that has to do with AI and incorporating AI into the mix of the food and ag value chain. Those seem to be exciting places in the space right now.
Right. I would imagine AI and automation will help fill a lot of these gaps, especially in terms of, getting the crops out of the fields, maybe better predicting weather patterns to avoid catastrophe. Where do you see like the most innovation happening around ag tech these days?
Yeah, so it's interesting that we talk a lot about AI, and I mean my view and is we just don't know. No one really knows. Is it going to be a blessing? Is it going to be a curse? Probably going to be both. And but a leader that I talked to that I really respect said, AI will be a defining element of my leadership for the remainder of my life. And how I hire and how I view future leadership will have an AI impact in it, which maybe is an obvious statement, but I hadn't heard anybody say it quite like that. And I think that's important for us to know. One, we don't really know how it's going to affect our businesses, but it's going to be a defining element of affecting the food and ag value chain in rural economies. You mentioned tariffs, and I didn't finish maybe my thought there, if that's okay. Look, you asked how folks feel about this, and I think generally speaking in food and ag, most are encouraged about the talks that have happened, and things seem to be going in the right direction. The elephant in the room is China. China is the largest market for a lot of these products, and we need to understand that the trade agreements as a result of the tariffs are optimistic handshake agreements. The enforcements themselves are the tariffs. Okay, so it's not like when China says I'm going to buy so many bushels of soybeans that they really have to do it. They've agreed to do it. So I think there's optimism, but there's very much a wait and see approach to see if they're really going to follow through with actions. Now, again, I mentioned this disparity, regardless of the opening of these markets, perhaps as a result of tariff talks and tariff implications, some commodities still have tariffs on them. Cotton is one that's still struggling. So depending on where you're going with your products or services and which countries you work with, it's a mixed bag in how. What one CEO also said that although they were super strong and in terms of their financial capabilities, they took a 20% decline in EBITDA this year as a direct result of tariffs. It's a
Wow.
lot.
It's a ton. It's a ton. So I am I'm always interested in like the connection between, the way people vote and the outcomes that happen. And I would imagine that many leaders across the ag space are concerned about the fact that things have changed around immigration, that the tariffs has created some instability. Is there a bit of a groundswell of realization or activation amongst the agribusiness to say, we need a more kind of stabilizing policy here in Washington that will benefit our farm producers?
Yes and no. I do think that there is a realization that um, that sometimes when you write the script for a war, it never plays out quite how you thought it would, and I think that there's some realization. Some of the leaders that I talk to say, look, um, our folks understood that this in their minds was the best alternative and would at least try something new and different. And that certainly has been the case in some ways. I mean, tariffs go back 100 years.
Oh yeah.
So, and the usage of tariffs has it's just been done differently. So, yeah, and I think there's some folks that sort of recognize that this might be a short-term challenge to gain long-term positive effects. That's certainly the hope. I think that from an election perspective, probably the best you could say in terms of a groundswell or a reaction to any of this would be that folks that voted a certain direction last time just may not show up to the polls. I don't think you'll see a massive shift. These are rural economies are, as you know, primarily what we call red in the U.S. and tend to be more conservative and have there's a lot of issues around that, not just economic. And so, I I, I would say that there certainly is a realization that things are challenging right now, but the hope is that long term there will be endemic change in the markets that they operate in.
Right. Now, obviously, this has created what I think people usually refer to as constrained resources. Like we're living in a different, fundamentally different environment now
Yeah.
for our producers. Will this drive innovation in other areas? Like you talk about cost cutting, that's not really innovation, but automation is. Um, it's been about what now? About 12 months. We're almost a full year into tariffs. A full year into a new immigration policy. Are the leaders that you're speaking to across industry really saying we're pivoting now, we're putting more resources into automation, into tech to fill these gaps, and then really doing a different maybe resource allocation in terms of how they recruit people to work within these businesses?
Yeah, I think the organizations that are going to survive and do well, and the leaders, perhaps in my space, more importantly, that are going to thrive in this environment are making those investments. Now, they are at the expense of other things. Let's be clear. It could be that layoffs and lack of compensation, disposable income for these rural markets are being, that those monies are being moved to more of the investments like you talked about. I think organizations that are sitting on their hands in this space are going to lose out. And those leaders, I think the stakeholders are going to look at that as being the wrong approach and probably make changes to the leadership, which of course is what our firm then does is help them find the right leaders for those organizations, which may or may not come from the food and ag space. I mean, right now, being able to bring talent in from other industries and sectors and attract them to these massive and important challenges, that's actually an enticement for people that consider food and ag, despite the fact that they might have to live in rural America and some of the amenities that they're used to in New York or Chicago aren't quite there. These are immense challenges that have a profound impact on who we are as humans. Maybe more so, in my opinion, than games and some of those things that might be really fun, but really at the end of the day are entertainment. This is life or death.
So if you're giving one piece of advice to your clients these days about how to weather all this change, what is it?
In terms of leaders and challenge, I would say so couple pieces of advice. I would say do your succession planning. I mean, from a talent acquisition perspective, you have to be able to groom people from within. You have to be able to bring people out, give them opportunities, and I think that's so important. And you need to be able to selectively place individuals from other parts of the economy and industries into your organization to sort of germinate different skills and adoption of skills. People that work in food and ag oftentimes stay in many longer than sort of other industries, and I think that can be good and bad. You want legacy, you want history to be part of how you run your business, because what's succeeded in the past can largely be repeated in the future. Usually, I think we're seeing a time today that, and we're advising that this blend of outside and inside is going to be a really key component. This mix, or uh, um, this mix of talent, I think, is going to be the right answer for these companies.
And I imagine that dynamism, that churn of people coming in and out, will only aid in these organizations becoming more resilient and more innovative in the coming years.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, David, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for all of your insights, and I look forward to sharing more of your work with my audience.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, Bradley. Thanks.
Thank you. If you're interested in agribusiness, I've included quite a few different links in the notes below. And of course, make sure you follow David and his company. You can find those links in the notes as well. And as always, if you're interested in learning more about our demographic future, as well as the future of prosperity across this nation and around the world, follow me on my Substack at populationnext.com. That's populationnext.com.